So today we're going to be talking about essentially how to grow our business with search engine optimization, SEO, and Google, just kind of focusing a little bit on Google, having it be the largest search engine in the world. So one of the things I always like to kind of start with is making sure that we're all on the same page here. There are a ton of different search engines out there, and there's even more than I even pictured here, but these are probably the ones that you've heard of when it comes to Google, Ask, Yahoo, Bing, AOL, DuckDuckGo, and all of these other, again, type of ones out there. But really it's understanding that what we're talking about with SEO or search engine optimization is essentially, flipping that phrase in on itself, optimizing our search engine presence. If we can understand what Google's looking at, what Bing's looking at, what Yahoo, how they're reading our site and what they want to see, then we can essentially conform our site or essentially our online presence to be able to kind of communicate what we do, who we do it for, and ultimately why Google or other search engines should choose us, number one, when someone's searching for X, Y, and Z. So really it's improving our ranking on an organic level. And so here's one thing I always like to say too is, if you ever hear the word organic search ranking, organic search results, all of those types of things, what it essentially means is that we're not paying, or there is no money being transferred to this search engine platform like Google to be able to be ranked there. Now you could pay an agency like myself, you could pay an employee, you could pay yourself to be able to do the work to communicate that and get the benefit from ranking higher, but you're not paying Google directly for that. That is called SEM, or search engine marketing, like Google Ads. And that's something we have a whole completely other workshop that we kind of talk about on, but that's a completely separate thing. Here we're talking about more of the long-term value. So instead of renting your, again, digital real estate, we're going to look to kind of own that. And how do we establish a long-term business relationship with Google? So today we're going to be kind of talking about content is key, this social media, but just really how social media applies to SEO, how mobile devices, help with that, some different Google tools, and just Google advertising, though, again, how that applies to SEO. We're going to talk about topics today that we actually have complete other, workshops on that we would go in depth, but this is all revolving around SEO. It's also important to realize that, you are going to hear me talk about Google all the time. And I just like to say the reason for that is because it is important to know that we can focus on Google, and it's essentially going to have a ripple effect to the other search engines. So you don't necessarily have to have a Bing search engine, again, marketing plan, and you have a DuckDuckGo one. It's really, I always like to kind of tell people is, especially local businesses here, I can almost guarantee you that your market share for people finding you on search engines is probably anywhere from 85 to 92% Google. So that's why we want to focus on that. Another reason of why we just want to focus on SEO is, here are just some kind of fun stats to kind of look at as well, is just Google search and advertising tools alone generated $385 billion of economic activity in 2019. Actually, next month here, we should be actually able to get 2020s, which we obviously expect this number to grow. And it's kind of funny, I've been doing these presentations for now 10 years, going back to my time at Google. And it's funny looking at 2011 when I was, when we were all jacked up at 80 billion. And now we look at 10 years later and we're looking at 385 billion, of that economic activity. So really, it's just understanding that this is the way that the world is going. This is the way that more and more people, no matter, again, class, age, race, gender, all of those kind of things, no matter that, more and more people are relying on search engines to find what they want. And obviously from a business, that is super powerful, because if we can tap into that, we can essentially then kind of communicate what we're looking for and what we essentially can help people with, and then ultimately build that relationship with Google and other search engines. Another thing I also kind of like to point out too is there are really kind of 5 main core components that you'll see a lot of times on Google. Now, there are other ones. You might sometimes see, you might see something with Twitter, you might see something with images. There are some other ones that you might be able to see, but these are probably the most 5 common components that you're going to see on a Google search. And also, all these components also exist on pretty much every other search engine out there, except DuckDuckGo, which is another kind of story out there. But for the most part, almost all the other search engines are going to have these kind of components. So it's important to realize that anytime you do a search, if that's a sentence or if that's a single letter, it's called a search query. So if you just type in, you know, best burger place near me, that's a search query. If you speak into your phone and say, how do I fix an overflowing toilet? That's also a search query. So it doesn't matter how it goes into it. It's essentially how you actually do a search on Google or a search engine. That's called a search query. A lot of times at the top, you'll also see paid ads. This is again is going to be a lot of times on Google related to Google AdWords. And so these are going to be, people are paying for these, you know, again, these ads to be running and the results that come with it. Local listings are a lot of times if people are obviously located very near your location. And we'll talk a little bit about this during this presentation as well. This is kind of called the snack pack. A lot of times it's showing like a lot of times the top 3 results, and then you can go into more with Google Maps. And then ultimately organic search results. That's a lot of times what we're talking about kind of here. The other thing to think about SEO is SEO is kind of the glue that keeps and kind of holds all of your online presence items together. You know, they influence paid ads, they influence your local listings, they influence obviously the organic search results. The knowledge graph or the ID card, that's another thing that can get influenced. It's more of just a visual representation of a business with more information. So these are kind of, you know, again, core components that are important to know about when you start doing Google searches and other online searches as well. The other thing that's important to realize when we start getting into SEO is that there are 3 types of SEO and they're done in 2 different phases. So the 3 different types of SEO, the first one is called back-end optimization. This one's usually the trickier one that people a lot of times associate with SEO, because this is the one where we're dealing with HTML encoding. We're a lot of times dealing with the different types of settings, or sometimes some of the DIY builders have like SEO wizards, they call them, or walkthroughs. This also is plugins. So if you're thinking of Yoast on WordPress or all-in-one SEO, those types of things. So this is all kind of behind the scenes. So this is a way to kind of communicate what we do, you know, who we do it for and where we do it. This is the kind of stuff that, you know, this is an opportunity for us to be able to use back-end optimization to communicate that to Google. We can also communicate, you know, this whole strategy is communicating all these things to Google is called front-end optimization. That's the second piece. That's pretty much everything you can see, feel, and touch and engage with as a user on the front end of your site. So this is like the content and the words that are on there, the media, the pictures, the video, even a lot of times the user experience, you know, looking at, you know, again, just the flow of your website and making sure people can pull it up and it's easily read. That type of stuff is going to be front-end optimization. Again, it's the stuff that you can really see and feel. And then last but not least, which a lot of times, sometimes people don't realize and forget about, is called offsite optimization. Obviously, back-end and front-end optimization are dealing with our website itself, but we have a whole third of just SEO is dealing with offsite optimization. So everything that's not your website, but pointing to it. And so for instance, social media accounts, little local listings on the different types of maps, your YouTube account, if you have different videos, if you're maybe a part of the Better Business Bureau or you're part of BNI or things like that. Again, when you have profiles out there, or if you have content on other people's sites, that essentially the key to offsite optimization is your URL. Because again, you can have one, there could be 10 different Skol Marketings across the world, but there is only one skolmarketing.com. So really offsite optimization is using things that aren't our website, but pointing to it with that URL, which is key. So those are going to be the 3 different types of SEO. And then these are the 2 different phases or stages of SEO. So the first one is called foundational SEO. This is a lot of times more of a one-time type of thing. What we're doing here is we're laying the foundation to your relationship with Google. We're essentially communicating the what, the where, and the who. We need to initially make sure with back-end optimization, with front-end optimization, with offsite. Again, this starts with obviously creating a website, creating service pages, creating our local listings, our social media accounts, laying that foundation so that we firmly can communicate, again, what we do, where we do it, you know, our service area essentially, and then who we do it for. So again, the whole point of SEO is communicating these things to Google and then building up a relationship with them so that they pick us and essentially rank us higher when people are searching for the things that we want to show up for. Well, again, you can't build a relationship with someone if they don't firmly know who you are. And so that's what this foundational piece is. It's essentially making sure that Google understands what we are. So now we can essentially at least start playing the game, if you will. And then that moves into relational or ongoing SEO. This is that ongoing building of a relationship with Google over time. This is, again, months, quarters, years worth of building it, just like any long-term business relationship that you may have offsite as well, is that's what we're doing here. And this gets into the why. Why should Google rank us above others when we're, again, when someone's searching for whatever we want to? This is where that starts to happen. Is, again, it's great if Google knows what we are and who we are. That's obviously, step one. But if they don't trust us, that's really the key thing here. Is relational ongoing is building trust with Google. And at the end of the day, really what we're trying to do, if you want to look at it this way, is we want to make Google look like a rock star. Anytime someone searches for something, if they're looking for, painters near me, the best kids park, to go to, a lot of times when they're searching that on Google, they may be picking you as to actually supply that need, but Google's the one that facilitated it. So always be thinking about, hey, we want to make Google look like a rock star so that, again, they think that we're great and they want to start ranking us better. Again, it's that building of that trust. Okay, so these next two slides are going to be super critical, and this is where we can kind of start this. And so here's the beauty about SEO. Is, say, again, you may be looking at this going, well, Ben, I've had a website for 5-10 years, and either one of two things. One is, can I even start SEO if I've already had a website for 5 or 10 years? And the answer is yes, you can start this at any point. The other question you may be asking yourself is, Ben, well, I've had my site for 5 to 10 years, and I've been doing just fine and getting leads. Why would I want to do this? Well, the other answer too is you can always be doing better. If you've never had SEO be a focus here and you're still succeeding, that's awesome. You should, again, you take that and run. But at the same point, don't cut off your nose to spite your face type of thing and just think that, we can't do better than that. And so that's really where it kind of starts with SEO. So you can always start this at any point in time, even if you decide to start a new website, if you're rebuilding your site, if you just are going to use your current site. And no matter what you've done prior, if you've never focused on SEO, now is always a good time to kind of start. So the first thing is, honestly, this is a lot of times good for foundational SEO, is building content around keywords. So it's important to understand how Google reads our site and our content. What Google essentially does is they send out these little bots that analyze your content and then essentially kind of, again, glean the meaning behind that content. The reason I say the meaning behind it is, yes, they are picking up on keywords. That's obviously keywords and base, again, keywords are a part of our language. Obviously, you put words together to make sentences. But the reason I explain it that way is that Google's not just looking for just, different keywords in there. They're looking for the meaning of the content. So this is why we have to and we should be doing some keyword research. Now, you can decide, to figure out how aggressive you want to be with this. I will admit that a lot of times, the more aggressive or the more effort you put into keyword research, the more a lot of times value you're going to get out of it. You're going to see that as a common theme throughout digital marketing. If you constantly take the easy route, again, you can still get by, but most likely taking it a few extra steps or doing it the hard way, a lot of times is going to have a better ROI. So here's the thing to kind of start with. And again, if you already have a website, that's fine. Let's go back and reanalyze it. Maybe you're deciding to rebuild or build a new website because you just started your new business. That's great. You still want to take this same kind of step process here. The first is to list out your demographics. Who are you trying to go after? Again, if you know their ages, if you know their, again, like where they're located, and that kind of gets to geographics here in just a second. But really, it's just like, who are you trying to go after? Make a list of those. Also, make a list of your products and categories and services, obviously, depending on if these apply to you. So make a list of your products and categories and your services. Another key thing here too is always prioritize when you're listing these out. This is one thing that I always like to kind of tell people is whenever you're making lists of, again, your demographics, your services, your products, the geographics, again, always prioritize them. And here's my thing too, is remember, you're putting, again, your resources of time, energy, and budget into this. You want to always stay focused. What I mean by this is you want to stay away from what I kind of call the coulds, meaning that I talk to a lot of small business owners and they give me their main demographics and they go, well, Ben, I also, this person could buy from me. And well, again, I guess I could go after that person. No, no, no. If you ever find yourself saying, well, I could go after this person or this person could buy from me, don't worry about them. Again, you want to stay focused. If you get too broad, again, like we want to make sure that Google firmly understands who we're trying to go after. When you add all of these coulds into there, it starts to dilute that. So just make sure we're remembering that as we're making these lists. So we've got a list of our demographics. We've got a list of services slash products slash categories. And then we've also got a list of geographics. Are you local, just to the Twin Cities here? Are you Minnesota? Are you nationwide? Are you worldwide? Those are the types of things that you want to look at. Then what we're going to do is make a list, and this one's really important as well, is we want to make a list of, again, phrases and services and, again, kind of keywords that you think that people are typing for or that you want to rank for. So for instance, if I'm a painter, most likely I'm going to write down, okay, residential painter, Minneapolis, residential painter near me, again, painting company for my house. Again, I probably know some of these internally because I know my business. Now, here's kind of the thing is, what we've just done is more of the easy route. We could just stop there. What we'd essentially do is we take these different lists and we'd start morphing them in together. We'd take the demographics, the services, the geographics, and we'd start blending them together. For instance, again, like I just kind of gave one is painting company, Minneapolis. Again, and you could start blending these together. Now, again, that's more or less the easy route. We can kind of get a list of those. The next step, which is highly recommended, is there's two programs that a lot of times I like to recommend called Moz or SEMrush. What these essentially do is you can actually input that data and it's either going to verify that for you, but also most likely it's going to, it's actually going to discover other key terms that maybe you weren't thinking of that you should also kind of target. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what we would search for, or sometimes even if it's right or wrong on what someone's searching for, it goes back to the meaning of it. What do they mean when they actually try and search for something? That's what we want to get after. That's what Moz and SEMrush can essentially help you with. We start with making those different types of lists. And then we can actually verify that and then get essentially more data from Moz and SEMrush to kind of figure out, again, what our base kind of keyword list is. So for every service, we should have kind of most likely 5 to 10 different keywords that we essentially want to go after. Now the idea is, okay, Ben, what do we do with those lists? So I've got, so for instance, Skol Marketing, let's use us as an example. We have 4 main core services. We have web development and design, we have SEO, SEM, and social media. Well, I would make these different lists and I would essentially come with 5 to 10 keywords for each one of those 4 services. Now it's, okay, what do I do with this? Well, the first thing is making sure we have significant amount of content that revolves around this, because again, that's going to be the number one way that you're going to be able to kind of communicate what you do, who you do it, and where you do it to Google is content. Now, again, this is sometimes a little bit different for people because modern website design is very minimalistic. Well, so here's the thing is we can definitely, again, work with that. Like for instance, like actually you can kind of see this again on Skol Marketing's pages. You can go just to our service page and see all of our services, but then there's a learn more button next to each one that is then going to go more in depth. That's a prime way to be able to kind of blend the, minimalistic, and you can still have a very beautiful site if you want that more modern look, but then still have enough content in there that if someone does want to read it, they can, as well as being able to communicate that to Google. So here's some things that you're thinking about and just kind of to note about when we're building content on our site. And if this is either, foundationally SEO, if you've never done this, like for instance, with service pages, or even ongoing relational SEO, for instance, with articles or blogs. So the 3 big buzzwords that we like to kind of use though in the industry and to make sure that you kind of at least realize is unique, natural, and relevant. So unique is probably the number one, is that we just want to make sure that we're actually creating this content. We're not copying and pasting. You have to be careful when you copy and paste because believe it or not, when, if you're a franchise, if you have competitors, or if you just think, taking someone else's content and swapping out the company and where your service is going to get you there, unfortunately, it's not. Google's smarter than that. Essentially what happens is that when you copy and paste, Google has actually already indexed that content to that website. So literally what you start doing is you actually reinforce that content and reinforce that website by copying and pasting it, because you're telling Google that that content is so good that you don't even need to make your own. You're just going to take theirs and use it. So that's why we need to make sure we need to come up with our own content. That doesn't mean that you can't use it as a, again, as a structure, but you should look at least be changing 40 to 50% of that content to start to make it unique. So again, if you find somebody's content and you like the way that it's structured and stuff like that, that's fine, but take that and start modifying it and making it your own. Natural, same type of thing here is it's going to make sure that we are just speaking naturally, and we're not just trying to stuff these keywords that maybe we came up with these lists. I'm sure we've all read sentences where you can kind of tell where people are just stuffing in keywords, because you would never have a conversation like that to another person. So a lot of times what I always recommend is, if you couldn't print out your, again, your content and read it aloud to in front of a group, again, group of people, is that you most likely shouldn't have that content in there. You want to make sure that the content, yes, is revolved around keywords and talking about that, but is not just cramming those keywords in there and it doesn't have a natural tone to it. Google can actually sense that with their different technology they have, and you can actually be penalized if you're actually just trying to stuff in keywords. And last but not least is relevant content. This is just a reminder to always make sure that your stuff is up to date, especially like with, for instance, blogs. Like if you go to Skol Marketing, we started in 2012. Well, a lot of the blogs and the content that we were writing about in 2012 just isn't, it's changed so much. So you want to make sure that you're, staying on top of it and you have relevant content, even not only from a topic standpoint, but obviously make sure you have relevant content, even from a marketing standpoint, when it comes to your team, your hours, your contact information, all of that kind of stuff. Now, here's one that's super important, and this is a lot of times where people can at least start with, is here's the thing is, a lot of times when we start working with people, we find a lot of small businesses have just a service page with maybe just a, quick, brief, either bullet points or some paragraphs, and they're essentially trying to communicate all of their services to Google with just that. Again, that's not ideal. What we're kind of talking about here is every service or every main demographic should honestly have its own page. You taking that extra effort is really going to be, beneficial and pay off in the end. So I'll give you just a couple examples. So if we were looking at, again, maybe a landscaper, and they do landscaping, they do yard cleanup, they do, again, snow removal. Okay, so maybe they have three main services that they do. Well, if they just have them on one page, this is what happens if you just leave them on one page, is someone in the winter is looking for snow removal and they start typing in and Google goes, well, I've got your website here that matches, but it only matches 33% of the content, because the other two are talking about, again, landscaping and, again, yard cleanup services. But here's the thing is, if you take that same content, put it on its own site and maybe even flesh it out a little bit and add some more content, now Google goes, hey, I've got 100% match for you. And now we've not only built up that trust, again, for Google, we also now have a better potential result for the consumer. And so this is why you want to make sure you want to spend some time fleshing out those pages and having each service or main demographic have its own kind of page. And a good rule of thumb is on average to have around 300 to 500 words per page. That's about, again, if you were to do double space, it's kind of like writing a paper in college or high school. So it's not, again, it's probably a lot less than you actually think, but that a lot of times is a good base to kind of give Google sufficient amount of content to kind of go after. Also blogs, again, so this is more ongoing, blogs or articles. This is where, again, like if we want to get our service pages set, as we can kind of imagine though, once you have your service pages set, you're probably not adding services every month or changing those. Those are going to be pretty well set. And that's kind of more or less aligned with foundational SEO. So some of the ongoing relational SEO that we can do is, for instance, blogs and articles. Writing 1 to 2 blogs per month can be a fantastic way to kind of help us grow that relationship with Google. What we can do is take one of our services and just kind of, talk about a specific piece about it. Like, again, a giving example about Skol Marketing is that we just wrote a blog and are posting it about for Facebook deprecating their Facebook analytics and what that means. Again, I'm not going to have that on my service page, but what that does though is I'm talking about a service that's related for what we offer. So we get more keywords, we get more content. And the beauty of that is you get kind of a 2 benefit thing. Just creating content shows Google that you're doing effort and you're just the act of creating content is good. But then doubling that with creating content around, again, products, services, or topics that you offer as a product or service is also then doubly, again, beneficial. That's why all of this kind of works, but it really kind of starts with that content. And it is important to know that, yes, when I'm talking about content, it's mainly written, but it's not just words. We're talking about pictures and videos, as well as a way to kind of blend those together, and Google also looks at those. So another kind of thing just to kind of look at to kind of continue with this content is key is another key one, more than just not words, is also video content. We have a whole separate presentation just on YouTube, and I encourage you to check it out. But this is, again, a great way if you really want to know kind of like, well, Ben, what's one of the really good ROI ways, return on investment, to be able to actually, communicate this content and get a really good value out of it? Using YouTube videos is a fantastic way. The other nice thing too is another reminder is reuse your topics or content, meaning that if you took the time to create a blog or article, why not create that into a video? Again, like here's a prime example again of the webinar you're watching right now. Skol Marketing is recording this because we're doing something, again, for you guys as a webinar. Well, we're going to record this and then be able to have that as a video. We're kind of reusing this content. We also reuse these topics and these different things that we talk about for then blogs. So they can go both ways. But a lot of times when people are starting out, I a lot of times tell them, take your blogs and then honestly just start, again, create a video around it. Jump on a Zoom and record yourself talking to it. Don't just read your blog, but have a discussion, have one or two people kind of jump on. You can, again, there's different types of videos you can kind of create, but it's really understanding that, again, let's try and reuse our content and, there's a way to kind of start. Also, I sometimes get a question of, Ben, okay, you've talked about blogs, you've talked about video, but how do I even know what to even start with those? The best thing to do is to figure out a question that you get asked all the time or that you think would be really valuable and start answering it. Think about how many times like that could even be beneficial for SEO, because how many times do you go online and search for a question? So again, if there's a question that's related to your, service, your industry, your product, your, again, whatever it may be, is start with that and then create a blog, then create a video. This is a great strategy for you to start creating that content and really start, again, communicating that to Google, which a lot of times will build that relationship up with them. Now, you also want to make sure that you're keeping your website up to date. Again, it goes back to that blog like I was talking about before, is just the effort of doing it helps you, not only even the context and the content on there, but even just the effort of doing it can help you. Also, your user experience. This is, I kind of talked about this at the beginning, is this is something to kind of consider is, would you like, again, your site, if you went on it, does it, again, does it flow well? Can I access everything from a mobile device than on a desktop? Is the site speed, is that good? User paths, really what a user path is once somebody gets to your site, depending on the demographic or the service they might, again, be looking for, is can they actually find what they want? And from you, are they going to be able to do what you want them to do very clearly? So for instance, if they come in on the homepage, are they very clearly going to see that, okay, I need my roof replaced. Here's the link there. Here's the information to do it. And now here's my call to action. It's looking at all those types of things. And that's why we just want to make sure we're considering all demographics for that, in that you're going to have different user paths, meaning that you're going to have different, obviously your user experience and user path might be a little bit different on your phone than your desktop because we're dealing with different devices. If you're dealing with different states, obviously we might have, maybe we do have, if you're kind of all across the country, or for instance, I work with some service industries like concrete or siding, and they may work up here in Minnesota and then also in Florida. Well, obviously, again, yes, we're all Americans and everything, but at the same point, there's a little bit of different demographic from someone here in Minnesota compared to someone in Florida. So you might want to consider maybe having some different content, again, aligned to those, and thinking about the user path and imagery. Again, if you're telling me that, Floridans and Minnesotans are your two main demographics, but all of your content and all of your imagery is just Minnesota stuff, that probably doesn't bode well for your, again, Florida clients. So those are the types of things to kind of think through that we want to do. But also remembering not to go into the coulds. These have to be main demographics that we're looking at. Also, what's important, and this is going to go after meaning of what I've been talking about here, is the hummingbird update. It's just important to know that several years ago, what essentially Google does now, every time that you do a search query, Google is trying to understand what you're searching for. I always like to say, for instance, if I were just to hold this up and said, okay, guys, go on Google and search for this. A lot of ours would be similar of what we're searching for, but I can guarantee you that we'd probably have, out of 20 people here, we'd probably maybe have 10 to 20 different answers, even if it's off by a character. The idea is that we all mean the same thing, but we might be searching for different things to get there. What the Hummingbird update essentially tries to do is to try to get the meaning behind that, using different factors of where you're at, your different device, the words you're using, the past history, if you have a Google account that it's tracking, things like that, Google's able to kind of do. What that essentially means you as a business, as a business owner, as a person that's in charge of marketing, SEO, and stuff like that, is that the Hummingbird update really kind of helps us stay focused just to the meaning of the content, that we don't have to, back in the day, honestly, we'd have to have strategies for, like, if you had, roof replacement company compared to roof replacement companies. Again, things like that, where you're just changing something so slightly. Nowadays, we don't really need to worry about that because the Hummingbird update really essentially understands that we're meaning the same thing. So it's not so literal, it's more off the meaning behind it. Another big thing just to note, and I just like to kind of say, is your SSL. So SSL is like the little padlock you see up on your URL bar. A lot of times it's a green padlock. SSL means also you're accessing your site HTTPS. Really what this is, it just means it's secure. This used to be more of an optional thing, and pretty much every e-commerce website out there has this, because it essentially, what it does is it encrypts and it protects information being sent. So obviously on an e-commerce site, you would want that, so it's protecting your credit card information. But also a couple of years ago, Google actually changed this and decided that they wanted all websites to have this. Just improved, again, security, improved user experience, because people are filling out contact forms and everything. Long story short, what I'm trying to say is you need to make sure that you have an SSL. This is actually factored into SEO. This doesn't mean that if you're not ranking well and you don't have an SSL that you just get one of those and you vault to the top. It just means, though, it is a factor within SEO. So make sure you have an SSL, make sure you have it, because another big thing too is if you don't, most likely at the top of your website, it will say not secure. That's not a really good message to send to people that are coming to your site for a user experience. If you don't have an SSL, the best place to check is just go to wherever your website is hosted and talk to them. Last but not least, understanding about SEO is it's a longer but stronger type of mentality, meaning that, if we go back 5 years, is SEO is much more volatile. And our rankings were. So here, it's going to take us longer to get to the top. But once we're up there, again, it's just like a relationship. Yes, there are opportunities where we could break trust and we can do that. But if you've been best friends with someone for 20 years and one of you do something to the other that they don't like, most likely that friendship or whatever isn't ruined. Now, again, if you did that with someone, week 2 of the relationship, that might do it. So that's why it's just understanding that we have a longer but stronger, and it's really built around that business relationship with Google and trust. YouTube, I just like to kind of mention again, we have a whole presentation on that, but I kind of mentioned it up there too. But just to kind of expand on that, is YouTube actually is the second largest search engine in the world. So this is why when I say, again, yes, we want to make sure we're focusing on our site. This is a great offsite optimization tool, because it's not only, again, a great way to help us get out there more and to help our SEO, it's also the second largest search engine in the world. So look at potentially, again, having a YouTube strategy, creating videos, again, asking questions. If you're an auto mechanic, maybe it's how to, again, change your oil. If you're a cookie manufacturer, it's, again, maybe taking people behind the scenes and doing videos to kind of show like, hey, this is how your cookie or your apparel or whatever it may be is made. So there's some really kind of cool ideas, but it's again, twofold. One is just creating videos and the act of doing that. And then it's also the quality and what that is kind of being, behind that as well. Okay, social media. So one thing to kind of know, again, going back to, I'm not going to talk how do we get more likes? Is this platform good for me? We have a whole other workshop just on that. But sometimes people forget that being on social media can actually help your relationship with Google. And it's really done with these 4 kind of main platforms. The first one was essentially called Google+. That's technically been deprecated, but now there's a new tool called Google Posts, and that's on Google My Business. That's the little red pins on the map, which we'll talk about here. But that social feature on that platform is also can benefit you with SEO. But believe it or not, Facebook, your business pages, your Twitter accounts, and your pins on Pinterest can also help you, because Google has relationships with all four of these. Obviously Google Posts because they own it, but they essentially have, they have access and relationships with all four of these, that they're able to essentially index them. And so when you produce content on them, that they're able then to be able to apply that to your online presence and help. Again, the whole idea here is to continue to create content that conveys the message, the demographics, using the keywords that you want to essentially go after and want to rank more for. That's what this is essentially can help you with, and this can essentially kind of do that. So social media can be a benefit to, again, your SEO strategy. The impact of mobile. So what Google's essentially going towards and has been kind of working for the past year is called a mobile first indexing. What this essentially means is, actually prior to this, Google would actually index your desktop first and then kind of start to apply that score to your mobile device. Well, now with over 50%, again, of traffic, the majority of traffic now comes for the internet, comes on a mobile device over desktop. Now it starts to actually look at your mobile site first. Why that's important is a lot of times as business owners and people in charge of websites or marketing, we most likely are looking at things from a desktop view. We, again, like whenever we build a website, we obviously build it on a desktop. But honestly, you probably should look at your mobile site more to make sure that the user experience is there, to make sure that the speed is there, because they can differ. So it's making sure that, again, that we have a good mobile experience. We also want to make sure that we have a mobile experience. If you are still operating without a mobile-friendly site, that absolutely has to be priority number one. You can't take SEO seriously or really kind of start to build a relationship with Google if you do not have a mobile-friendly site. I'd say most of them out there, and any website that's built in today's world, any new one is going to be mobile-friendly. But if you're still operating with a site that's maybe even, potentially 5 to 10 years old, you might still, again, need to relook at this to get your website to be mobile friendly. So some things, again, some user experience things to kind of look at on mobile is potentially use accordions. What we're kind of talking about there, I'm sure we've all seen it, where maybe it's just a preview text and it says read more and then it expands. That's because sometimes a really good way, because obviously on mobile, it's a lot easier on a desktop, for instance, to scroll through 6 paragraphs of text. It's a lot more difficult to do that on a mobile device. So that's why it's saying take some time and look at your site from a mobile perspective and see what's kind of going on there, so that we can kind of essentially kind of apply that and make sure that we have the best user experience possible for that. Again, scrolling is much more acceptable on mobile devices because it's there, but we want to make sure that people aren't getting scrolling fatigue and just, again, can't find what they're looking for because it's there. It's the way that it's designed. It's that user experience, making sure that the videos or the pictures can be seen on them as well. If you have motion or animation, making sure that is also seen on mobile devices. So it's just making sure that we understand that mobile is a huge part of SEO, because especially now, Google is essentially looking at your site first as the first way of understanding the relationship and the user experience on your site. Local listings. So this is one that I've mentioned now a couple of times. This is Google My Business, GMB. This is little red pins on the map. This is essentially, searchable local listings, kind of like an online Yellow Pages. A lot of companies kind of have them. So the big 3 are going to be Google, Bing, and Yelp. Those are 3, again, big ones that you absolutely manually should just make sure that you're on. Now, a couple things with those is obviously this is important because we can be showing up in that little snack pack that I kind of talked about. This is also what drives your knowledge card or your ID graph that I mentioned at the beginning as well. So, this platform of Google My Business drives both of those things on Google. Also on again, Bing, it does the same thing, again, very similar. Again, they just have Bing, it's just run on Bing Maps instead of Google. And obviously it's run on bing.com instead of google.com, but very similar. But obviously Google's going to give you much more just because it's more utilized. Another thing that's important that I also alluded to is Google Posts. So this is essentially like doing social media posts for your Google My Business listing. This can be super beneficial. So again, explore it. Make sure you get a Google My Business account, go in the back, and you'll see a category called posts. Create one. Start to, again, make a schedule to maybe create one post a week that you can do. Maybe it's an event coming up. Maybe it's a tip. Maybe it's a sale. Whatever it is, start creating those Google posts. They can have a positive impact on not only your SEO, but also your local listing rankings as well. Really what, again, these local listings do for you is they allow for you to kind of do the reputation management, get reviews. So we can start to manage both positive and negative reviews on Google, Yelp, and other kind of platforms. You're most likely going to get your reviews on Google, Yelp, and Facebook, but there are some other platforms out there too, some that are industry specific as well. But that's essentially what these local listings are going to be able to kind of do. I get asked a lot of time of, Ben, where should I start with SEO? What should I do? Honestly, Google My Business or these local listings are a fantastic way to start because it has a fantastic ROI, especially for local customers. That is one thing to remember about this is that, Google My Business and these other platforms are for your local customers, while your website will be for your global customers. So make sure that we're kind of, again, looking at that and realizing that you can actually hide your address and just show a service area. So especially in today's world, if you are now virtual, you don't need an office, you don't have an office, that's okay. It's just that if you're more of an e-commerce and you just service the whole world or something like that, this platform is really not for you. It has to kind of have more of a local context and a local kind of parameter to it. Really what this also helps you with is what's called NAP, name, address, phone. That's what NAP stands for. Why that's important is, again, this goes back to communicating to Google, is we want as consistent as possible our NAP online. So we want as consistent as possible with our name, our address, and our phone so that there's no confusion on who is who and what is what. Now with that, you can actually, like I said, you should probably get on these three manually, meaning going to google.com/business and signing up, going to Bing Places and signing up, going to Yelp and signing up. But there is a platform that I recommend called Moz Local, and there's actually another one called Yext that you can also look at. And what these ones do is, believe it or not, there's actually dozens upon dozens of other local listings out there, and they can have an impact on you because, again, it can help with your offsite optimization that you have all these other local listings out there that are pointing to you, and also, obviously, people do utilize them. And this can also help us keep consistent NAP because, believe it or not, a lot of these other local listing companies, if you don't verify your information or submit your information, eventually they'll just create you one, and sometimes that information can be wrong. So using Moz Local or Yext, what you can essentially do is work with those. It is a paid service, and you would essentially then go in there, you would submit your NAP, name, address, phone, and you would essentially create a listing. And then that is actually going to disperse it out there to the other types of local listings out there. So it can be a fantastic way to save and have a high ROI. Like I said, I still recommend doing Google, Bing, and Yelp on your own because those are very powerful. But then using the dozens upon dozens of other ones that are out there, use something like Moz Local or Yext. Google Analytics. So this is another one we actually have 2 workshops on, but I just like to kind of talk about this as in the context of SEO. It's kind of funny that this is probably the only platform that we'll talk about that just signing up and doing it doesn't really have an impact on your SEO. What it does do, though, is understanding what's happening so that you can make educated decisions on, again, like where we should go with the budget, what we should be doing, seeing the growth of even your SEO and the traffic coming from Google. That's what Google Analytics does. Now, I always like to mention is that Google Analytics cannot retroactively go get data. So if you're running a website right now and you do not have Google Analytics, you absolutely should just get it installed, even if you're going to let it sit and not even look at it for another 6 months, year, whatever. Is again, it cannot retroactively go get data. So you want to make sure that you at least get it installed and let it run. But this is a very important tool for ongoing kind of optimization and ongoing assessment of your needs and where to potentially go to kind of verify or validate your other efforts, if either paid efforts or, again, your own organic efforts as well. So that's where Google Analytics essentially kind of comes into play there. Another tool which is super important is called Google Search Console. This one essentially is it allows you to kind of communicate to Google in a different way, and this one does help with SEO. So a couple things that we can get with Google Search Console is the first one is we can actually submit a sitemap. A sitemap is essentially the kind of like a live file of, and it's more of like a skeleton of your website. So it essentially communicates to Google all the pages that are on there and the different assets that make up your site, like pictures or blogs and pages, and essentially communicates that to Google in an easy to read format. The file is called an XML file. Essentially, what this does is this lives on your site. And so every time that you change a page, every time that you add a blog, it adds to this XML file. What happens then is why we want to submit this sitemap to Google is that every time that we change those, eventually Google would get around to re-indexing your site. But why wouldn't we want them to do it faster? Because we have new information for them. So what this tool allows you to do is essentially, raise your hand and say, hey, Google, I've got a change here. I need you to come re-index this. And it does that pretty, again, consistently. And a lot of times it can be within hours or a day that, those changes are being re-indexed. We can also get some basic analytics, some search data, some, again, just website data on that, which can be beneficial. And also, we can also get some alerts. So a lot of times what Google's now doing is they even have warnings, again, that are just saying, hey, maybe, again, pay attention to this, or errors, things that you definitely should kind of fix. Well, that's a great way that Google's looking out for us, because obviously nobody wants errors on our site, and we don't want Google having errors trying to read our site for obvious reasons, because that may impact our, relationship with Google. So again, signing up for Google Search Console, submitting our sitemap, looking at the basic analytics, getting some keyword data, but then also ongoing, getting some of those alerts can be super valuable on there. So highly recommend Google Search Console, again, for your SEO efforts, both, initially and then ongoing. Okay, last but not least is going to be Google Ads before we open it up for some questions. So one thing to know, again, with Google Ads, this is another one we have a whole presentation on, but again, it's just understanding that, you can run Google Ads, but having better SEO and also trust and a relationship with Google influences your ads positively. It doesn't work the other way around. If you just run ads, it's not going to help you rank organically better. It's a one-way street. Because if you really want to think about it, is that Google's going to take the money from somebody. But again, they want to be made to look like a rock star. So if we build a relationship with them over, again, years with SEO, and we're running Google Ads, is Google goes, hey, well, again, I trust you more, so I'll give you a better ranking or a better rate on your ads, because I have a better feeling that you're, again, we have more trust built up. That's ultimately how SEO can impact your Google Ads. So again, if you're running Google Ads, you still want to make sure that you're potentially doing some SEO work, not only because long-term you're going to own that value, instead of SEM here is going to be, you're more or less renting it, but also knowing that having better SEO also can impact your ads positively. They work together, but they are essentially still separate. And that's just one thing to kind of keep in mind and kind of look at with that. Okay, so as we kind of recap this, is really, again, remembering SEO is like having a long-term business relationship with Google. It's about that trust factor, communicating it in, again, the 3 different types of SEO: back end, front end, off site, the 2 different phases of foundational and ongoing, and then looking at all these different types of things, the content. Remember, making sure we do that keyword research. We have those different service pages, looking at social media as a way to kind of communicate, making sure that we understand that mobile is super important, Google Analytics, Google Search Console, and then even Google Ads and how that's connected. So all of these things work. It's not going to snap our fingers. Remember, it's longer but stronger. To be honest with you, good SEO is probably going to take a good 6 to 12 months to really get going. That doesn't mean you're not going to see any rankings or anything happen before then. You can still see that, but just realistically, this is what we're kind of talking about. This isn't just a 1 or 2 month kind of experiment thing. Again, just like having a long-term relationship, you don't go into, hopefully meeting someone thinking you're going to have a long-term business relationship just for a month or 2 and expecting to be their #1 referral partner. It takes time. It takes touch points. If we're using the offsite long-term business relationship analogy, it takes text, it takes, having coffee, phone calls, referrals back and forth. Well, it's the same kind of stuff here. It takes establishing your foundational SEO. It takes, again, blogging, doing videos, getting reviews, all of these different types of things, which then are going to be touch points that we can essentially build that relationship up with Google. So again, I know that's a lot of information to digest. I know that's a lot to kind of understand and kind of do, and know that it's not just, again, quick thing there. But with that said, I do want to open it up for questions and see, I'm just kind of looking at the chat here. and kind of see, the questions we have. So please put them in here as we'll go through them. I want to, again, obviously try and get them as much as we can here. So one question from Lisa is, do you have any resources you would recommend for GMB? So within GMB, Google My Business, honestly, the best resource too is just to go to google.com/business and start your local listing. If you do find that Google has a local listing out there for you, you can actually verify that and actually then redo and resubmit the information. That's really the biggest resource for GMB, is that, kind of just signing up for it. They'll even send you recaps then a lot of times every month of what's been going on with that. That's usually kind of the best way to kind of look at Google My Business for that. So Terry has a question, is how is a prior client able to put a review on my Google My Business listing? So the one thing with Google My Business is that it's essentially a public profile. So anybody can add again, because it's a public profile, you can get reviews, again, from pretty much anybody. So if anybody's had any interactions with you, again, they're able to essentially do a review for you. So even a past client, again, just because maybe you haven't done business with them in a year, they could write you a positive or potentially, unfortunately, a negative one a year later, as long as they kind of did business with you. It does, there's a little bit of wild, wild west to it, a little bit, that there's only so much that we can kind of control. But I will say the great far outweighs the bad when it comes to some of those situations. Perfect. Well, I see some people. I see Jess, you're tuning in from Massachusetts. Thank you for that. I see a bunch of other compliments. I really appreciate that, guys. Again, if anybody has any other questions, put them in. But while you guys are maybe considering if you have any other questions, I do want to say thank you guys for tuning in. Here is my contact information. If you guys have questions, again, I know that all of us are different. Some of us are B2B, some of us are B2C. Obviously, I know this might feel like you're drinking from a fire hose. I know I talk fast. I know we've got a lot of heady subjects. But if you do have questions either now or honestly into the future as you start doing these, please feel free to reach out. This is honestly my favorite part of my job, is being able to help people. If you have questions about our services, great, we can talk about that. But one thing I do want to offer is we offer free consultations. Again, these are not a sales pitch. If you want to talk about that, let's do that. It's just another way that we kind of give back. So if you want to talk a little bit further, if you want me to look at some of your pages or your website and give you some analysis or some help, if you need some questions or some help on your Google My Business account or Google Search Console, feel free to reach out. Honestly, these are no obligations. It's just our way of giving back to the community, is just reach out to me, send me an email. I'd be glad to set up a call and we can kind of go through that stuff and actually just kind of help you free of charge there. So I really encourage you to kind of check that out. Also, last but not least, is check out our workshop schedule. We love to, put these on, as well as check out our YouTube channel for some of our previous ones. We love to do them live. We love you guys to check us out live because we get to answer these questions right in the moment. But also we know that in today's world too, is we like to be able to produce that content. You could watch these at any point. So check them out on our YouTube channel. I don't see that we have any more questions. So again, I want to say thank you guys all for tuning in. You guys have a wonderful day, and Skol.
Thanks, man.